everyone can hear us well? Yes, super. So hopefully everyone's returned re-energized, I think, after an already packed morning of conversation and lunch. So we have another very, I think, even more topical than it initially was going to be topic for you for this next panel session, and it's the sort of evolving role of emerging technology in conflict. So we're thinking here both sort of in a conventional warfare, looking at the sort of really rapid innovation, for example, in drones, in the battlefield in Ukraine, but also thinking about the sort of changing role of emerging technology like AI in the cyberspace, in the hybrid domain, and thinking a bit how that sort of evolves, impacts the evolving battle space moving forward, and kind of threat landscape moving forward, and what opportunities there are as well, as a lot of European and other countries now think about sort of rearming, reconstituting their defense industrial base. How do we bring those technologies in? We're talking a bit in the break, like we're here in the briefing session, like we're in a situation now where we have effectively not enough money, not enough people, and not enough time. So there is this tendency to look at technology, right? Maybe it's a bit of a panacea there. Can we bring that in to expedite some of that, maybe leapfrog into new ways of thinking about sort of doctrine and the like? So that's something we'll be discussing today with our excellent speakers. Also considering some of the flip sides of technology adoption. So there's both questions around like how do we actually do this well? So as we know, a lot of the innovation is currently coming more from the private sector, especially a lot from the commercial sector as well. They're maybe not so, let's say, used to working in a defense sphere. How do we bring that innovation in? How do we build guardrails into those processes as well? How do we make sure as we adopt new technology that we don't create new dependencies? Something we'll discuss that's, of course, been in the news a lot recently, new vulnerabilities as well. And also, of course, recognize that we do not hold a monopoly on new technology. So we can, we, broadly constituted, can use technology, but at the same time, of course, adversaries and other actors also have access to new technologies. So what new vulnerabilities and threats does that bring? So that's what we'll be discussing, and we have an excellent panel to do so. So I'll briefly introduce each of them. And what we're going to do is that each of them are going to give a brief presentation, sort of setting out their views on some of these intersections between the private sector and public sector and the like, and then we open up the floor for discussion. So first up, we have Richard Horne, who is recently became the CEO of NCSC, which is the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre, and has a distinguished career in both public and private sector in cybersecurity before then. Next up, we have Hannah Shelest, who is the Director of Security Studies and the Global Outreach Program at the Ukraine's Foreign Policy Council, Ukrainian PRISM. She's also the Editor-in-Chief of Ukraine Analytica and a non-resident fellow at SIPA. Next up, joining us online from Brussels is James Apatsurai, who is the Deputy Assistant Secretary General for Innovation, Hybrid and Cyber at NATO. He was also previously a special representative to Central Asia and the Caucasus and NATO spokesperson. Then next up, back in the room, we have Joanna van der Merwe, who is a lead trend analyst and AI specialist in the Dutch Army's Land Warfare Center. She's also a non-resident fellow at the Center of European Policy Analysis. And then last but not least, we have Aaron Libby, who is the Chief Growth Officer at Altana, which is one of the leading data platforms, really thinking about how AI and data analysis can be used to reduce supply chain risks. And he also has a long career working in different aspects of the defense tech space. So it's very interesting to get his private sector perspectives on some of this as well. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Richard to start us off.
Thank you very much. What you can't see is the tiny writing you've got on your screen there that you're reading from. I'm amazed you can do that. I'm impressed.
AI, no.
Yeah, so hi everyone, it's great to be here. I think I'd offer three observations that I think are fairly obvious, but they really sort of frame this debate. I think the first is technology is moving at staggering pace. It's easy to talk about AI, but actually to see how especially sort of infrastructure technology is developing is just phenomenal. The Mobile World Congress has been happening in Barcelona this week. And I was just catching up with the team who have been out there this morning before coming here. And you just need to lie down. And when you hear where our communications technology is moving and how telecoms and space are blurring, how the idea of a static infrastructure has just gone. It's software defined, it can be reconfigured at will. It's just, I mean, it's just mind-blowing. And I think that's really important because it's the pace that's driving the change in how we need to work. We can't keep up with that pace with traditional ways of thinking. So I think that sort of the pace of technology is one thing. The second thing is the blurring of boundaries. So military to civilian, the blurring of boundaries between what's civilian tech becoming military tech and is happening in a staggering way. And I know you'll be able to talk about that a lot from Ukrainian experience. And the front line to the home front, that boundary has gone. We're a physical island here in the UK, but in the digital world, there's no such thing as an island. And for us thinking about potential conflict against a capable cyber adversary means defending the home front and the supply chain is part of defending the front line. And that's a key part. And then I think the third consideration that's worth reflecting on is that we place quite a few ethical constraints over how we develop our use of technology to avoid collateral damage and things like that, for example, in the military context. Our adversaries may not, and that mean they're able to develop at a faster pace. So I think those together, I would offer the so what is our national security mindset needs much tighter integration. It's something that we've driven in cybersecurity. The NCSC in the UK and others globally have driven very much an integration mindset. This is about the secret world of government working with the private sector. It's about getting industries working together. It's about getting military working with civilians. And that total integration is really going to be what determines our success.
Thank you. We've been discussing just before the start of this session, and there were quite a hot debates already started. I hope it will be here as well. But we realized that we have more questions than answers probably to you. But at the same time, to have the real development, what we need in this sphere, we need properly to set the diagnosis and start asking questions, to which real questions we need to respond. And here I would probably emphasize several issues. First is that with the fashion to the technologies, sometimes we're losing the balance or understanding, and that is the question number one: can we find in this sphere the proper balance between the overestimating and underestimating the role of the technologies in the modern warfare? Because I remember the first days of the war when everybody been talking just about the drones. Then the electronic warfare and the number of drones at the certain parts of the battlefield increased that much that de facto they became irrelevant. Or some of the technologies became irrelevant, and again, you return back to the basics. Then it started the debate, okay, you have all the OSINT, you have AI that is analyzing the data, but without the human, without your agents in the field, you are not able really to assess that information that is coming. Not speaking about all those malfunctioning that we started to have with ChatGPT, who invented the cases that never existed. So all these questions of underestimating and overestimating is one of the main challenges with which we would be constantly probably working in the next, I would say, the generation of the development of the technologies, because it is not a quick, it's more of the philosophical question. The second question is that raised to us, it is the problem of the classical understanding of the supply and demand. We used to think for the decades that it is the military industry that is producing the innovation that then come to our daily life. A lot of the things that we are enjoying de facto came from the developments that have been done for military originally. Now with the development, especially of the high tech, it appears in a different way. The private companies, the startups, they are developing quicker. But at the same time, the question with which we are working very often, when they are developing, do they really understand the demands of the capabilities that the soldiers need on the ground? Because something is sexy, all of us are running to develop certain things, but on the ground, de facto, you need different things. Or you're just on the different speed of what is necessary. Just this very small example that can demonstrate that being in August in Taiwan, in one of the biggest producers of the drones, they were so proud talking about how now their top priority is the long-range drones. In Ukraine at that time, for us, the biggest challenge was not the distance, but the electronic warfare against. For my question, do you work with something that would make you more viable or like really being able to work in the conditions of electronic warfare? They were extremely surprised because they thought that they are really with the top topic that is now important. We need these drones to fly longer and to be with the bigger load of the explosion. When on the ground, the situation was already different. It just didn't came to the big rooms probably of the fairs or the conferences for them at that time. So these different speeds and the different understanding of the demand and supply is something that we are really working now. The question number 3 is outsourcing. In many of the spheres connected with the military supply, we are that much outsourced, and especially in the development. But what if it is only one company controlling? We would like to make it as liberal as possible because it is necessary to have more companies investing, more companies developing. You need just startups. But then what if? And the Starlink case that we are discussing the last 2 weeks, what if Mr. Musk just would stop it for Ukraine? It is a question that everybody is talking about, but nobody has the answers. And in this case, can we be prepared? Should we have the bigger involvement of the government? Is it really the role for the government in this case? Or should we, in these critical spheres, identify what are those technologies that the government should control much more than the business? And what would be the next spheres where we would not be able to work if suddenly the private company decides, or the owner of this company would decide to stop providing of this technology to the military, because we are not speaking that your WhatsApp suddenly would stop working, you would survive. Yep, you just run to Viber or to Signal or to thousands of other messengers, but there are certain technologies and the certain conditions where you cannot do it. Yet one question that is definitely raised for us is the capabilities of platforms. When we are talking about the new technologies, do we, and building these demand, from what we are starting? What is our baseline? Do we really, at the strategic level, going and seeing what is already on the market, and then adjust our strategies and tactics according to what is already on the market, even if it is not yet in production, but just in the development stage? Or we are at the stage of understanding that, okay, what capabilities we need, what signals we need to send to the market, where they need to search these solutions. And with here, I would come to the final conclusion for this initial, it is that we used to have a very long circle from the R&D to production to testing, then again production, adjusting, and so on and so on. But with the technologies, this circle became much quicker. And are we ready at the governmental level to ease the procedures, considering the sensitivity of the military procurements? So to have this testing ground and the feedback from the field, not from the Ministry of Defense, but from those who are really using these technologies, as quick as possible to improve production and to be one step forward. Because as with the drones, we've been talking about the, 2 weeks, 1 month sometimes when you completely need to change the certain situations. But is it the same with the all types of the technologies that we are using? Should we forget the old mechanisms and just to start thinking? Because these platforms versus capabilities is important, as we've been just remembering the case. 2018, Ukrainian Navy strategy, everybody is speaking about the platforms and saying like, oh, your maritime drones, who cares about this? That is the toys. Yeah, that's nice, develop it, probably we will use it, but no, we need a big frigate. 4 years later, Ukraine doesn't have Navy as the classical Navy, but we are using the maritime drones as the main capability because it's reaching the goal that we need on the ground. So that's why these questions of the outsourcing capabilities, demand, supply, and testing are the questions that should become the baselines, but not just, okay, will AI be able to do it 3 times quicker or do the targeting instead of us? That would be already the technical questions for us if we would answer the basics in our development.
Thank you, Hannah. Handing over to James. Mm-hmm.
Hi there. Thanks for the invitation. Sorry I couldn't be there with you, but I hear there's a lot of Canadians there, so at least we're well represented. So actually, I'd like to, I think, pick up a little bit from where your first 2 speakers have gone, because we're all, I think, thinking in the same direction. just to step back for a moment, when I started in this job 3-4 years ago, I think the main focus for us at the time was stocking the shelves, meaning we wanted to foster the development of dual-use technologies that could be used by military end users, because we were aware that there was a lot of development in the private sector, but we weren't accessing it, but B, a lot of the young startups and scale-ups were kind of falling into Death Valley, unable to get funding to scale up and or being acquired by other actors, and we didn't necessarily want that. So we leaned in with what we call Diana. It's sort of our transatlantic DARPA, engaging with startups, with test centers and accelerator sites. And we set up a deep tech innovation fund, about €1 billion plus, to do patient capital, long-term investments, sort of draw down the money over 8 years, let it ride, and do a little bit more what the Chinese do in some cases. And that includes because we recognize that when it comes to accessing dual-use technologies, but also just straight-up innovation, we aren't necessarily in the lead. You know, we talk sometimes about maintaining our technological edge, but I think it's safe to say that in many cases we don't have a technological edge, in particular when it comes to China, and there are technologies we all know where they're doing very well. So that was the focus until recently. But I think, like in many areas, the war on Ukraine by Russia and how it's unfolded has taught us many lessons. And one of those is it's great to stock the shelves, but somebody needs to buy it and buy it at the speed of relevance. So rapid adoption is our focus now. And just to outline very quickly a few thoughts on that. One is the last speaker just said quite accurately that the scale of innovation in Ukraine in some areas is 2 to 6 weeks, where a new piece of software, a new piece or AI variation is pushed out, it's used, it's then neutralized by the Russians, who have learned and then come up with their own innovation. And that cycle is going on all the time, mostly software, sometimes hardware. And that's the speed of relevance in this particular scenario. So what we don't do is adopt and adapt innovative technologies at that pace or anywhere near that pace in any NATO country, and certainly not in NATO. So our focus is to do a few things with an eye to the summit that's coming up in The Hague. One is to get a sort of clear political understanding and direction to accelerate adoption of innovative technology. So to get a clear political statement in that regard. Second is to help allies map out what's there, what's available. So to get a view of the ecosystem and actually be active in going out and searching out innovations and making them available to everybody. So that's sort of a necessary step. Next step is to de-risk the technologies. On the one hand, you know, we need to invest in technologies that aren't necessarily mature, and that's a little bit taking some risk with money. But what we need to do is de-risk the technologies that are more mature so that the armed forces are getting things that work. And there are various ways to do that. You know, Ukraine has been an area in which a lot of testing has taken place, but I mean, I really hope for Ukraine that it isn't a testing ground forever as a result of, you know, this situation. We need to be able to de-risk technologies for all allies. Another point, and I just have two, so don't worry, I won't talk too long, is to change the culture in our own acquisition processes. And that means rewarding risk-taking. The situation, for example, in my country, if you're investing in different technologies and you bet on 8 of them, and 3 of them are real successes, but 5 of them don't pan out, you are not rewarded for the 3, you are fired for wasting taxpayers' money on the 5. There are no positive incentives for defense or civilian officials to take risks like that. But these are the risks we have to take because that's the way it works. So we need to introduce the positive incentives and rewards amongst the people who take those decisions so that they're rewarded for this kind of activity and not punished for it. And frankly, that's the case across NATO countries. We've done all this work. Final point I would make in terms of what we think needs to be done is to set aside money for discretionary spending, uncommitted funds. What's happening now in defense budgets is they're basically committed for 15 years. There's such shortfalls, and the people who are buying sign contracts or commit the funds for very long periods. But then when a new product comes on the market or a new technology emerges, they don't have any financial flexibility to actually make a quick move and have a look at it. So we want basically to ring fence money in every procurement budget so that the people looking around can say, hey, that's interesting. I didn't see it last year because it didn't exist, but now I see it and I want to try it. And then finally, of course, to get it into the hands of end users who test it. And I really, really agree with our last speaker. The clear lesson we've gotten is testing in a lab isn't enough, because actually the testing and adaptation takes place on the front, in the battle. So we need to change the way we structure our forces, and we need to change the way we de-risk our technologies to take it as close to the front as possible, test it there, iterate it there, and then introduce it quickly into the armed forces. And if things don't work, they don't work, and we'll move on. That's okay too. So it's a real challenge. I always say, you know, everybody agrees, but then at a certain stage, the dead hands of retired colonels reach up from the grave to grip the way we've always done things forever. We can't do that anymore, and we've long passed the time when we all recognize that things have to change. There is resistance in our systems for some good reasons and some bad reasons. But if there's one thing that's happening now, it's that the kaleidoscope is being shaken. And before the pieces settle, we can make positive changes as well. And this is one area where we need to do it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, James.
It's always hard going this far in a panel, and I am haunted by the dead colonels always reaching on the grave, so thank you for putting that out there. I have to start with a disclaimer in that nothing that I say today represents the views of the Dutch government, the Dutch military, or any group that I'm affiliated with. I was only allowed to come if I said that. So most of the speakers have already stolen my approved speaking points, so I'm gonna try and stray from them a little bit without getting in too much trouble at home. But I think one of the things that when I saw who was on this panel, what was the unique viewpoint that I could bring was that fact that I've actually stepped down from the strategic level of defense advising and gone down to the operational level. I spend my days in the field with soldiers trying to get to see what is the reality that I'm advising on. And one of the key aspects is the fact that we have spent years training for an enemy who is very different from the one that is now the primary concern. And a lot of the way in which we've invested in training, the way we've invested in technology has a lot of assumptions baked into it that are very concerning if we were to be faced with the situation that Ukraine is faced with. And I'm not sure how our technology stance would actually withstand facing an enemy that has really, really capable electronic warfare, but is also spent 3 years, as much as Ukraine has spent 3 years learning warfighting, relearning warfighting. We in Europe haven't fought war since World War II. We are going to face an opponent who has spent 3 years learning how to be a warfighter again, and we need to focus on that. And we've heard the whole morning the discussion about deterrence. I think up until last year, deterrence was always coupled with nuclear. Part of deterrence is being a formidable warfighting military for every country in Europe. That is the language that Russia speaks, and that is the language that we need to relearn. And so I spend a lot of time trying to learn that language at the moment. And so I want to bring some observations, preliminary observations from my time. I've traveled across Europe. I've spent time on exercises currently. And some of the observations that I have, I'm the AI expert. My job is to try and advise on where we can realistically, very quickly integrate AI to improve our combat standing. And it's not a very rosy picture. I think a lot of the conversation is dominated by the word autonomous. And we're always focusing on autonomy, which as an AI expert, I can say is coming. but is quite a challenge to integrate because of the legal and ethical implications that it has. But we haven't been focusing really on automation. And automation, I've noticed when I was in the field, especially, and I work from the brigade level down, looking at our soldiers and what they're doing, what they're spending their time on. A lot of it is administrative work, and we talk about reducing the cognitive load on soldiers, and they're spending time on Excel sheets, doing things that can be very easily automated, and we know from the civilian sector that they're already developing these technologies. They've been tested, proofs of concept, integrated into businesses, yet for some reason we're focused on autonomous drones, which do hold promise, but we have all these really easy wins that we aren't focusing on. And the return of investment on those, especially now that we have increasing defense budgets, the return of investment is, I mean, in business terms, is insane. It's very simple to integrate, and also in terms of the return of investment of increasing the morale of our warfighters is also incredible, because they will start to be excited by the systems that they're using rather than dreading the enormous Excel sheet that they have to work through. And this is a true story, where I spent 30 minutes watching somebody wrangle with an Excel sheet in what was supposed to be the middle of combat. Which was disheartening. And then I think one of the things that is overlooked is there are foundational technologies, and then there's the emerging technologies which have to be integrated into those foundational technologies. So for instance, a battlefield management system, which is essentially the system that our soldiers use to assimilate information from different parts of a headquarters and different levels of headquarters into one image that they can then build their operation plans on. Those battlefield management systems are not what they should be. And discussing whether we can build AI into it when the foundational system itself is not user-friendly, it's not interoperable, the training needs to be able to be a soldier who can use it is too high. You're having soldiers who get maybe 4 weeks a year to train on the system, and then it's not user-friendly. And I can say this from personal experience, because I have tried to put together a maneuver plan on a battlefield management system, and it was not in any way similar to any computer that I use in my daily life. And what we've learned from Ukraine is you can have these soldiers, and we have years to train them now, and I mean, we don't have years anymore, but we have these years to train them, and you have soldiers who've been trained for 10 years, but the moment we go into war, you will be bringing in soldiers who have not had years to train. They are civilians who are coming in. You want their systems that they're expected to use to be as close to the systems that they find intuitive as possible. And I think the Ukrainians have shown that with their battlefield management system, which is based on Android. And I've seen it firsthand, and I can tell you, ask any millennial, they'll be able to use it really easily. And that's what you want, because you want these people going in as quickly as possible. And some of the functionality challenges that I've seen, you would never see deployed in a civilian setting. Functionality that soldiers are finding out the week before they have to go on exercises that don't work, and trying to spend their overtime trying to figure it out. And we're supposedly telling them that we're trying to reduce their cognitive load. So I have questions about what we're focusing our budgets on, and whether we're focusing on the things that will bring really high return of investment. And as Zaluzhny said earlier, Ambassador Zaluzhny said earlier, that the low-cost technologies in Ukraine has made a significant difference. And it's not just low-cost drones, it's low-cost. Every piece of technology has been a game changer on the battlefield. And I think we need to take that lesson to heart and really start changing the way we do that. And so a bit of the so what of that, my prelude to what I might be advising different governments in the future is the relationship with the private companies. We really need to look at the full innovation maturity model, from ideation, experimentation, scaling, to implementation, to institutionalization, and what is the role of different groups at different stages of innovation maturity. And at the ideation phase, really the private companies are leading the game with their ability to come up with new ideas. What is the role of a government in that stage of innovation is really coming to the table with a problem that we need the private companies to help us solve. We need to be experts in warfighting problems, capability challenges, capability gaps. We don't need to be we don't have the ability to be as expert in the technology as the private companies do, but we are the only groups that know how to be experts in warfighting, because legally speaking, only soldiers are warfighters. So we need to own that and come to the table with it. That is really the value add. And then we really need to make some painful choices. The timeline of being able to push something over the fence is no longer there. We have 5 years. We had 5 years. The Ukrainians have bought us quite a bit of time to get ready and become warfighting capable again. And we owe it to the Ukrainians to make use of that time and become warfighting capable, to be a credible backer of whatever the Ukrainians decide to do going forward. If we decide to be part of their security guarantee, we need to be credible. Credible means being able to be a formidable warfighting group. And we owe that to them. And so that's going to require some painful decisions, some sunk costs on technologies that we say, you know what, they're not going to come to fruition in 5 years. We'll put a little less money into it and start buying some other stuff. And those are painful things to do. If you've spent 25 years developing a specialized system and you find out that actually it's not going to be ready in 5 years, so now we're not investing in it anymore, we have to do that. But I don't think anything for militaries going forward is going to be comfortable. War is painful. It requires painful decisions, and we are not at peace. So we need to start getting used to making those very painful decisions.
Thank you.
Great. So yeah, I'm going to pull a thread that emerged sort of in the 2 panels before lunch and try to focus on how technology can actually improve public-private dynamics. I think it's really relevant in the context of the shifting geopolitics, some of the hard choices that we need to make, and frankly, just the narratives around how can we scale defense production efficiently, right? And heard a lot about how we're going to be putting tons of money, into new defense expenditures, how we're going to try to ramp production, and that's sort of in every FT and Economist headline that you see on European readiness these days. But one of the most significant challenges to scaling defense production lines is developing and maintaining secure and resilient supply chains. And so it's kind of an unsexy footnote, to the idea that you want to go and build and deploy these, like new defense tech, but it's at least as important as the development of the capability to produce, if not more so. And it's really, really hard. And so supply chain resilience and security is hard because it requires visibility and collaboration across vast networks of thousands of companies, thousands of facilities that take raw materials, produce them into intermediate goods that ultimately go into battle-ready systems. And visibility and connectivity at that scale requires technology, just full stop. You just cannot, humans can't interact at that scale efficiently and on any relevant time basis, but it also requires a new approach to procurement and to program management. And so to take a, sort of a meandering trip through defense procurement and make it short, it's typically structured that, a government issues an RFP and, a prime wins it. And because of privity of contract, there's basically very little oversight as to much that happens beyond the system that's procured. Governments actually very often have very little visibility into the supply chain at all, and where they do, it's typically sort of a snapshot in time. On the date of the award, here's what we believe the prospective supply chain is going to be, and then it's only updated, periodically, or in the case where something goes wrong. And so what that leaves you with is that most governments really don't have a sense for the foundation of the systems that they're procuring. They don't have visibility into the supply chains, and that risks the entire scaling project, and it frankly introduces the risk that adversaries can be tampering with these systems that you're investing so much money and time in building. And it doesn't have to be that way. Over and over and over again, you see, this part, is or this part was produced by an adversary company and it's critical. It's the only one of its kind, or there's a single point of failure related to some piece of equipment that was engineered in and could have not been, but now it's now that the system is sort of has taken a life of its own, and you can harness technology to preempt those kinds of problems, those kinds of supply chain snarls, those sort of design errors or inflexibilities, which I see as fundamentally just network problems, right? If you understand what is the relevant world of potential inputs, and at scale, and you can start to run technology on top of it, you can understand what are my options. You can build optionality into programs. You don't have to sort of be stuck with sort of a static system. And the challenge is when you don't have visibility, you don't have that optionality. And so our perspective is really that, like, using high-scale data and artificial intelligence, you can build a map of the supply chain, you can reveal the networks that you rely on or that you wish to rely on, you can monitor them at scale, including as they evolve, and then you can collaborate across them. You can actually reach across, not just to the prime. The government can sort of collaborate with the prime. The information can be flowing from deeper in the supply chain. That allows you to verify information, allows you to explore different scenarios, and it allows you to maintain agility as your needs evolve. Or I think as Bronwyn stated in an earlier panel, as we continue to evolve our understanding of what the challenge actually is. And I think what's really interesting about where technology is right now is that you actually don't have to own the means of production to have command of your supply chain. Technology can allow you to understand with whom you are actually dependent, or upon whom you are actually dependent, and whether or not you can trust them. And so I like to call that virtual vertical integration, and I think that's sort of one of the promises of technology right now. But the scale of the supply chains is so large, and this sort of pulls a bit on a thread that you raised there too, is it's not just about sharing data at scale, right? The idea is that technology has to exist in an incentive structure that rewards efficient collaboration, right? What you don't want is just sort of perfunctory data dumps from the private sector, because it's just sort of too much to ingest or to actually make sense of. And you also don't want government just going on data fishing trips effectively and wasting company time, right? So there has to be an efficiency incentive structure into there, and then you have to overlay to handle the scale AI to basically triage the risks, right? You need to compile information in a way that's actually usable so that the scale doesn't become the enemy of utility. And I'm saying these things because I've seen them happen. So in the context of the US Customs, for example, we're seeing importers who are reaching across their supply chain, deep into it, to among other things, rid it of forced labor. And then they're transmitting that information to the government in advance of import to effectively get a green lane, so to give them expedited entry. And that benefits both sides, right? There's an efficiency structure in there where the government gets more information on good things coming into the country, and they can focus their enforcement efforts on the unknown things, and that helps them increase their enforcement efficiency at the same time as it helps the private sector. We're doing the same thing in the context of the US Space Force, where government and the industrial base are actually collaborating to create a dynamic picture of the space supply chain and to get ahead of vulnerabilities and to help sort of understand what is the optionality available, what technologies are available, what can be plugged in even in the deeper tiers, not just sort of at the top level capability. And what we're seeing is that contracts are being structured building in that collaboration, right? So there's actually a motive on both sides to sort of continue this the collaborative effort to basically give the government the visibility it needs to understand the supply chain and to affect it over time as its needs evolve, and to help, I think, sort of maybe most importantly, help the private sector get onto the same side of the table as the government, right? It's a very often sort of an adversarial process, or where one side makes sort of a demand and the other side complies, and it doesn't have to be that way. This is, I think, a little bit to James's point earlier about how do you sort of encourage innovation across the life cycles. Like, the more you're in a collaborative relationship, the more you're sharing relevant information, the more dynamic you can be. And so I guess the reason I sort of use this time to talk about that is I just hope that in the rush to put new defense technologies into the field, we don't give up the opportunity to build resilience and security into the supply chains that are actually the foundation of those technologies in the first place, And frankly, don't let a crisis go to waste by not using this opportunity to rethink procurement and program management to restructure it. So,
thank you. So I think it was an incredibly rich conversation already, and it's probably sparked a lot of questions. So we have around 20 minutes. I have many questions, but I wanted to get a sense from the room how many there are and to see, okay. I figured that would be the case. So I'll cede my chair duties and I'll first ask some questions. I do have a question at the end, so I'll reserve a bit of time. But first question, maybe I'll take 3 questions first. One here, and then one there as well. So. Oh, sorry, that was not the most helpful. Split across the room, perhaps. Sorry, I have to run a bit of a sprint.
Thank you, Rob Flanders, BAE Systems. Question for the whole panel. Do we need to redress the balance between security requirements and classification overheads associated with battlefield technology development in order to move faster, even if that poses potential risks of future compromise in a warfighting scenario?
Good question. Thank you. So over here.
Thank you very much. Great panel. Andrew Boreen with Flashpoint Threat Intelligence. My question is actually more related to stuff that's been happening in the past few days and an event that's happening in Brussels with 27 European leaders. This group's actually in a really interesting spot to comment on this. Are there any prospects, like NATO needs interoperability, but are there any prospects for an actual European federal organic defense force of some sort? And if so, how would those acquisitions work when you have disparate acquisition systems such as France, Germany, other major players?
Interesting. And then there was the third one over there. Sorry. We'll do a second one.
Okay. Larissa Brown from the Times. A question for Richard, really. I'm just wondering if you were worried about America's decision to stop offensive cyber operations against Russia, and if you're concerned now about sharing intelligence with America given its leaning towards Russia. Thank you.
Oh, well. Okay. That's Richard, I don't know if you'd like to start.
So I think on the first one, what I understand is it's a pause to reflect, and that's that happens. So I think there's in current times there's sort of waves on the sea, and then there's currents underneath, and there's trying to work out the difference between the waves and the currents. And we'll see, but at the moment I think it feels like we know what we're doing, and when it comes to the intelligence sharing, our allies and our intelligence sharing networks are working, certainly in the area of cybersecurity where I work, we are working exactly as we have done in the past, and that's our strength, is the way we work with our allies.
Would you like to immediately address the procurement question?
I'll pass that on. As you're asking about the European acquisition, so we have the only European Union member state here. So she would be in charge of this probably. But in general, I can think that a lot of the necessity to accumulate the forces since last year de facto led to the situation that the European countries already started thinking. Look to the Czech initiative for for example, munition for Ukraine, when they've been trying to accumulate the forces and to do jointly. We see it with the several other technologies like working and in terms of the support for Ukraine. So I think that those hesitations with the Congress financing for Ukraine in April last year really pushed a lot of the European countries to think how it's possible to do jointly. And that's why we started to have this pool of financing. And now it's just the question is, will it go just for the procurement or would it go for innovation as well? And we already have the structures like Diana, but within the European Union as well. And last year, as far as I remember, it was even the overview of the strategy, where they should go, what technologies or what procurement, what weapons. At least it was at the level of brainstorming. As soon as you're starting asking these questions, the decisions are coming. And now with each decision from the Washington, we see that the solutions are coming quicker that probably previously we would discuss for 10 years within the Brussels corridors. With the intelligence here, I think that we need to understand one very important thing. It is the two-way road. Yes, we are losing the US intelligence, but whoever asked within the last 3 days how much of the intelligence the US can lose in this situation? Because they had the Kyiv station, they had a lot of the information about the adversaries, not only about Russia, but including about North Koreans, for example, about the Iranian technologies they've been receiving from Ukraine. And now we are already having the questions from the so-called Global South. They are asking, from the Five Eyes, should we share this information with the Americans if the trust is blurring? I don't want to say that it is already lost, but it is blurring. Yep, it is already reasonable doubt about who is, and in the intelligence sharing, the trust is always question number one. So with the last about the declassification, I just looked at it was one of the points that I put for myself for the initial and then just skipped because of the time. But really that is the question is that usually we have the lessons learned within the armed forces separately. And in many of the military cultures, unfortunately, they share experience when something went good, went well. But like in Ukraine, it is the Soviet school, I would say that is the whole post-Soviet bloc. To share what went wrong, they would never do it because it is something like to demonstrate your weakness. When for the innovation and for the improvement, you need exactly to share this. So now we definitely see with these, at least in Ukraine, when we allowed testing even of the very, very freshly developed stuff on the battlefield, it gives. But I cannot say that it is already the level of the state policy. In some spheres like drones, yes. But in other, very often, unfortunately, it is the wartime conditions when it is just the personal contacts or the certain gray zones that allowed you, okay, test it, try it, and then give us your feedback. But it is not official feedback. So that can be temporarily, that can be during the really difficult conditions on the battlefield, but can it be a policy for the countries? Definitely not. And here we need to probably reconsider a lot of the not only bureaucratic restrictions, but in general strategic restrictions that we have, and what can we do to bring the smaller companies as well with their possibilities on the ground.
I'm going to go for the European Federal Force question. And again, these are my personal opinions and not the official positions of the Dutch government. But I think to look at the likelihood of a European federal force or a European army, whichever term is being thrown around, you need to look at the historical way in which the European Union was established and why defense remained a core part of sovereign states is because it is a core part of being a sovereign state, is the ability to maintain control over your military and choose when and where you're going to deploy it. So the European Union, I know that most states in the European Union would prefer to maintain control of over the ability to decide when and where they deploy their militaries, and therefore the idea of a European army is quite unlikely. Because it is obviously a very different formation than the United States of America, which is the key difference there. I think since 2022, there has obviously been a lot more collaboration and a lot more groundbreaking ways in which the European Union has stepped into the defense realm and made sure that there is aid being supplied, and that is still a growing part of the European Union. And I think we're breaking new barriers all the time in Europe as to how we can support Ukraine and how we can collaborate easier. But again, to bring it down to the level that I've been looking at true interoperability, this is going to be whether it's as European Union, a coalition of the willing, whether it's through NATO. The question is the interoperability. If we're going to choose to go together, can we interoperate? And that, at the implementation level, at the ground level, there are still huge challenges to being interoperable with the technologies that each country is choosing to use for key parts of their warfighting capability, and choosing to invest in, and who actually is the private company that is supplying it. I think we need to make painful decisions at that level, because interoperability is the only way Europe can truly withstand the threat that exists. And the rhetoric to be interoperable exists, the strategic level will and political will to interoperate exists. The practical implementation is where I still have questions.
Aaron or James, you want to come in on either of these 3 questions?
After
Maybe
you,
to
James,
see.
go for it. No? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay. In that case, I think just to touch on the classification one, so this is not me speaking in my role as a executive at Altana, but more as an attorney. My view is that there's sort of a pendulum between rules-based systems and principles-based systems, and I think the balance is way too far on the rules-based system as far as classification is concerned, and I think that is having massive effects, both in the U.S. and abroad that I've seen in terms of limiting the effectiveness of the deployment of new technologies, whether that's artificial intelligence or otherwise. Just the idea that to take a classification adjacent example from the U.S., but effectively, if you build certain technologies that have been trained on U.S. government data, some of the IP ends up residing with the U.S. government. That's very, very difficult in the context of a private company, and so you have to we have to tread carefully there. And so I guess when I say using the idea of a rules-based versus principles-based system, it's really just to say that if the principles of classification are upheld, so for example, we don't want to disclose sources and methods, but we can still share information in a context that sort of gets whatever the outcome is, the desired outcome by the government, gets that done. I think that sort of principles-based approach should more often apply than I think it presently does, and I think that would open up a lot of interesting innovation pathways that don't currently exist. And so, I mean, that's a hard system to unlock, but that's my perspective on it.
Can I add a quick one to that? I think that the key thing to differentiate is between information and data, and a lot of the new innovative emerging technologies are based on data, and we're trying to apply this also from an AI perspective. We're trying to apply information classification to data that is key to being able to develop the technologies, and I think we need to reassess also based on that, trying to make sure that exactly rules, principles are fit to purpose, and sometimes they're not anymore because we're not talking about the same thing anymore.
We have time at least for 2 more, I think. So I think there's a question here. This is an urgent one. And maybe do quite quick responses so we can try to get some.
Andrew Adamson from King's College London. We've talked during the morning sessions about the sort of battle-winning impact of low technologies on the battlefield, so low-cost, one-way effectors, munitions, those sorts of things. And I'm wondering where the panel here thinks this leaves deterrence, because we always think of deterrence in terms of hard power. Is there a configuration of deterrence? Is there a posture of deterrence where the battle-winning, which is an effects-based thing, and the battle-winning capabilities that we're seeing in use in Ukraine can be factored into our defence posture alongside the traditional hard power?
Thank you. And then the last one over there, behind, sir.
Thank you. Tony Reeves from Deloitte. Can defence procurement be reformed? Or is the zombie apocalypse of dead lieutenant colonels just too powerful?
Thank you. Well, James, I don't know if you want to start with the second question. Yeah.
Thanks. I think the dead colonels, I shouldn't keep going. I work with lots of colonels. I love the colonels. I only mean the dead ones, just to be really clear about that. But actually, I'd like to address both, and I'll start with effects-based, because I think that's the key word. My answer is clearly yes. We can definitely use new low-cost technologies to enhance deterrence. And there are multiple models for that, but as our Ukrainian colleague just noted, the Ukrainians drove the Russians out of the Black Sea Fleet, drove the Russian Black Sea Fleet away from the coast without a navy. That's a powerful effect at low cost. There are variations of that, not just including hardware, but also including software that can have an effect. And I would just add to say, my colleagues in defense planning here, and some of them are there with you, but also in all the capitals, they are going to have to work on acquiring a lot of capabilities over the next few years, some of which will be hard to spool up quickly because they're complex, they're heavy, and it requires creating basically an industrial capacity or expanding it that wasn't there until now. We need to be able to bridge to that because we don't have endless time. And we can bridge to those heavier capabilities also using some innovative, low cost, high volume technologies like drones. So my answer is clearly yes, and we have clear examples of how to do that. Can we change defense procurement? I think the heart of it is this. Everybody has understood the problem, and every government and also NATO have created innovation agencies that are great, but are adjacent to real procurement. And they move super fast because they're moving alone. We have to move the system, but we understand what needs to be done. And so the heart of it is just moving those principles into the main area. And it requires a lot of pedagogy. I think people are attached to their platforms, especially senior people in uniform, sorry to be so blunt. The ambassadors here at NATO don't always know what's out there because they've got full-time jobs, and we only manage to bring these issues to them on an occasional basis. So we need to teach the leadership, expose to them what is possible. The good thing is there's a lot more money coming, but we shouldn't let the money then flow only to heavy platforms. So that's what our Rapid Adoption Action Plan intends to do. And the power of NATO is, of course, not only can we get everybody to agree to something, but also we have tools here, like our defense planning process, like our capability groups, to help support allies to make the right decisions to accelerate procurement. So I'm pretty confident we can do it.
Fantastic. I have one question to pose to the group, but unless anyone wanted to come in on any of the other two
just,
first.
Asking the question to your question about lower cost or something. What does mean low cost? Compared with what? We are speaking about the $500 drone. That's low cost, yep. Or we are speaking about the Sea drone that can be, or the Bayraktar. Bayraktar costs the same as the tank. So, but we think about the tank as the heavy, but about the drone as the low cost. So I think that first of all, this low cost, it's also a little bit changing. It's just that in this case, and also when we are speaking about deterring at which level. Because yes, drones could deter on the tactical level at the certain small part of the battlefield. Yep, that's helpful. But will it help at the strategic level? Maybe no, because we are still speaking about the nuclear, and we heard the last year how nuclear being the main deterrence for both sides. But then we have the middle level, like what just been described about the Black Sea. The possibility for Russians to operate in the Black Sea, is it the strategic level or is it a tactical level? Depends probably on your task. So it seems to me that with this low-cost heavy, we started to blur a little bit the tactical and strategic level of the deterrence. Because sometimes just the ambiguity of the technology that we may or may not implement can be a deterrence for SBAR itself. And it would not mean how expensive it is or how costly it is. The question is, do we have something against it? That would be the main consideration.
Thank you. So I have one final really quick question for the group.
Hi,
Oh, sorry. Huh? Okay. A question for the group, and that is, well, we spoke earlier today about there maybe being white smoke out of Brussels as soon as today, but I think everyone kind of agrees that probably the direction of travel will be, there will be quite large spending, both sort of for kind of rebuilding defense capabilities in the months ahead, as well as defense of the home front and resilience, some of these other areas. So if there was one thing you would want the sort of people making the decisions on some of those, one thing to kind of drive those efforts or be really embedded in those efforts, what would it be? Yeah.
Shall I go first?
Yes.
So I think for me, I would say coming from a cybersecurity perspective and thinking about cyber defense, I think agility is a core part of cyber defense now, being able to take outcomes and achieve them in a different way on a different technology platform gives you resilience. And I think if there's one thing around you could take that principle far larger and say agility, whether it's recoding on the front line, procuring weapons, low cost impacts in a different way, I would say agility.
Maybe Aaron, you want to go? You can also go next
yeah.
that works.
I would just add one word, production. Because we have technologies, the question is, are we producing enough? And do we understand? Because I'm afraid that after 3 years, we are still producing in many countries as for the peace times. So we need this money just to make it available. When it is available, it's effective. Otherwise, no sense in technology.
Good one. Agility production. Joanna?
Oh, I would argue, as I've said, I'm here for the soldiers who we would send into battle. I would argue that we need to free up a lot more time for them to be training and exercising with the technologies. The technology itself may hold the promise of bringing about battlefield effects that you want, but unless the soldiers know how to integrate that into their maneuver warfare and into their doctrine, it is still just a piece of technology. So free them up for training, give them less admin tasks during the year, and send them on exercises.
Great. I think we start to get a good checklist here. Aaron?
Yeah, I think I double down on agility, but to be a little more prescriptive through collaboration, right? So you should build in flexibility into the systems that you procure, understanding that what you procure for the war of today is not going to be the thing that you need necessarily for the war of tomorrow. And so if you don't have that collaboration built in, you're going to be stuck with an obsolete system.
Fantastic. Last word to you, James.
I guess my one word is one standard. It has to be the case that as this procurement takes place, it is one standard, it's NATO standard. It's all great, and we really want this procurement to take place and all this ramping up, but we can't afford to have multiple standards and multiple systems.
Thank you. Well, thank you. So I think that's all we had time for. Sorry, I know there were quite many more questions in the audience, but we're running over a bit. So I think thank you very much to our panelists for a really interesting, very timely conversation. Thank you.